Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox Reviews, and we are waking up with watches. Smell the coffee and the precious metal. Today we are discussing a broad range of watches, all of which have their prices listed in the description. So if you want to know the price, ready and evident. Also, we have a new direct service line for those of you who wish to reach out with purchase questions about anything you see here or on the channel. tmosso at thewatchbox.com is a direct inquiry line to me and my crew to answer specific questions about these watches and their purchase. Today, let's start off with something spectacular from the realm of, well, let's hold off on the finisher. Here's my opener. Launched for 2015 in a series of 5 watches, 38 examples of each, the FP Journe 38mm stainless steel limited edition. Now, it was a series of watches that were intended as the send-off to the original FP Journe 38mm case size, and this is an example of one of the 5 models launched. This timepiece, the Calendrier, was actually discontinued the year before this series of 38 examples times 5. So this was a brief extension of the line featuring an ultra-rare FP Journe stainless steel case in combination with the 38mm size, in combination with the rose gold movement, in combination with the discontinued model. It even included the rare for FP Journe full deployant clasp, also in stainless steel. So you get an extravagant and nostalgic FP Journe look as this combination of the white metal case, 38mm size, and yellow gold dial was more prevalent early in FP Journe's production between roughly 1999 and 2006 than it would later be. Now, this was also the beginning of the end of the 38mm case size, which was phased out shortly thereafter. The dial featuring an annual calendar on top of a automatic movement with 5-day power reserve. In truth, it'll run for 7, but 5 is the chronometric power reserve. Let me just make sure we're turned through the date change right there. Get it out of the danger zone. This is a retrograde annual calendar that requires correction only once per year during the jump from February to March. Now you can see the system is designed for absolute user friendliness, as I can adjust in either direction to adjust the calendar itself. Now, the calendar is a nifty retrograde. As you can see, it has a scale outboard that jumps dramatically from the 31st back to the 1st, creating a little bit of dynamism in what can otherwise be a fairly static, if practical, complication. Now, flipping the watch over, you can see this series of 38 pieces includes a rose gold caliber 1300 movement. And I do mean rose gold, 18 karat, solid gold bridges and plates. You can see a combination of Grand Doge or barley corn guilloche on the rotor, circular Côte de Genève on the bridges, and then there's an engine-turned perlage on the base plate in 2 different sizes, large and small. An extraordinary watch in that it's a little bit of a little giant. Not a huge watch on the wrist, but with an enormous amount of presence. This FP Journe in stainless steel, a limited edition of 38 pieces, has quintessential Geneva elegance and discretion, as it is a giant of high horology without the outsized presence and the ego trip that comes with that size. This is a watch for the connoisseur and the Journe purist who wants to get into something very scarce indeed. Now, let's quickly take a look at another famed product of Geneva, albeit one that's perhaps a bit more mainstream, with the Rolex Yacht-Master. Now, this is a model, the 16622, that came out in 1999, 7 years after the original Yacht-Master, and many folks believe this is the definitive Yacht-Master model. With a platinum granular sandpaper-like dial, it was the first Rolex platinum dialed watch. It features a bidirectional yachtsman's bezel that is designed for impromptu timing against the minute hand, and it too is in solid platinum. And you can see it's not an insert like you'll find on a sub. It is a solid platinum bezel. Both the calibrated scale, which is a combination of media blasted satin and then raised, relieved, and polished numerals and indices, and then outboard there is a knurling. The Yacht-Master also has an elegant case form that is very similar to what you'll find on a 40mm Rolex Daytona, and it has far less in combination with the sub, the GMT, and the Sea Dwellers than it does with more elegant dress-oriented Rolex watches like the Datejust and the Day Date. Throw this one on the wrist. This watch lived a long life, long enough that the original stamped clasp and hollow center links were eventually replaced with solid center links and a full milled out clasp. And you can see this watch on my wrist, remarkably easy to wear, features the later bracelet that was attached to create a very modern timepiece. So although this watch originally bowed in 5-digit form back in 1999, it became effectively indistinguishable from later solid milled clasp, solid link Rolex watches like the Sea Dwellers, like the Subs. So this is a timepiece evocative of the best of the 90s, but without any of the material compromises of the 1990s Yacht-Master. This feels like a modern Rolex project and product on the wrist. Now, I talked about the day dates, and it's important to note that the day dates represent probably the best value in modern Rolex. They're all in precious metal, so you've got to be down with paying for white, rose, yellow gold, or platinum. But here you can see a charismatic combination of white gold as well as a diamond set metallic salmon dial. Now, this dial, sometimes known as copper, sometimes known as salmon, sometimes known as pink, has an extravagant look thanks to white gold indices that have been set with brilliant cut gems. Unlike some white gold day dates, this one features a full fluted conventional precious metal Rolex bezel, the fluted always implying a gold bezel. And this is the reference 118239, 36 millimeters in white gold, double quickset. This is actually a 2001 serial number, so this was one of the earliest examples of that generation of day date, which debuted back in 2000. On my wrist, it's a handsome watch. As you can see, 36 millimeters means it wears well on any wrist, and because the day date even then was a flagship watch, there are no hollow center or end links here. Everything's very solid and contemporary. It even features, as you can see, a somewhat more sporty configuration, as the day date, best known for its president bracelet, here features the oyster bracelet, which is a little bit more substantial. You can see it's exactly what you would receive with a Yacht-Master, a Submariner, or a Sea Dweller. So the look of the oyster on a day date gives it a bit more wrist presence. Now, if you want traditional, it doesn't get any more traditional than the President. The watch, often nicknamed the President because of its illustrious, infamous, and famous ownership, owned by many presidents and presidents for life south of the border. The timepiece with a glacier blue dial in one of its earliest iterations. This is a late 2006 serial number, and you can see that the blue hadn't quite grown as intensely blue as it is today. It was more of a silver blue back then. Now, you can see this one does feature that domed bezel style, but this is a platinum watch, not a white gold watch. And you'll appreciate that with the proper president bracelet, this one appears more conventional. Still with the crown clasp architecture, you can see that there is a partition point between the two sides of the bracelet, but it's only marked by the crown itself, which is a lift lock system featuring a beak and a hook. So it's not a friction fit clasp as the previous day date would have been. This is a friction fit day date clasp. This is the one from 2001, and you could see the difference both in terms of internal finishing and internal architecture. And then you could see by 2007 what's known as the Super President, sharing an internal design with the Super Jubilee bracelet, and it's that beak and hook lift lock system that snaps together and requires unlatching to open up. Throw this one on the wrist and you can see this watch too features a diamond set dial, but it's a bit more subtle. This is what I like to call the iceberg or the ice water dial, as it features a combination of diamonds on that glacier blue base. Now you can see the diamonds here are not just brilliant cut, but at 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock, they also include baguette cut diamonds to give a little bit of differentiation. You can hear our first responders outside on the street in Philadelphia. We are on a city, and we are on the 3rd floor on Walnut Street. We thank them for their service, and that's all you hear in the background. Rest assured, we're not being robbed. The timepiece on my wrist, 16 centimeters circumference, wears beautifully. If you want an absolute Mac Daddy flagship Rolex reference that flies under the radar and represents tremendous pre-owned value, getting into a platinum 36mm day date is the way to do it without paying any premiums or getting on any wait lists. And these are modern classics in every sense, but also very true to history, as the size of the basic 36mm day date, as well as the appearance and the president bracelet, has not changed in any substantial fashion since 1955. Now let's jump into some crazy watches real quick. From Jaeger LeCoultre, a timepiece I once owned, the Duometre Chronograph 42 millimeters in white gold. This was a 2010 limited edition of 200 pieces. Now you can see it's the Duometre Chronograph, which is the original version of the watch launched in 2007, but here with a white gold case, double finished with polished welded lugs and a satin finished mid case, and then a matte black dial, and it is matte black. What you see is a granular matte black with a little bit of a texture like sandpaper, just like we saw on the Yacht-Master. And this watch here featuring a combination of white gold hands for the time. You have hours, minutes, and then center white gold seconds. And then you have a chronograph function with a mono counter that features chronograph hours, chronograph minutes. And if you look at the bottom, there's a scrolling single digits minute disc. And so you have hours, minutes in the tens and minutes in the singles on a single dial. You also have center seconds with the rose gold hand at center. Note both constant and center seconds are coaxial over a Foudroyante or a flying or lightning second hand that is making 1/6 of a second jumps. So when you stop this mono pusher chronograph, it will show you the hours, tens of minutes, single digit minutes, seconds, and sixths of seconds. 2 power reserves, and by the way, when you reset it, it's a wonderful little bit of theater. 2 power reserve indicators for 2 manual wind 50-hour power reserves. Now I mentioned that the case flank is double finished with the lugs welded on and black polished, and then the mid case satin finished. You can also see that there is a beautifully double knurled crown. You can see that there are shallow and then there are raised knurlings on the crown, and then the crown itself features a relieved and polished border with relieved and polished J&L logo and then a media blasted base, and that's the attention to detail lavished just on the crown. Turn it all over, caliber 380 is a masterpiece. It is a JLC movement built like a Lange. You have the twin power reserve barrels of 50 hours each. They wind in different directions. You can see the vintage 1880s style valet de jeu ratchet springs and pawls. And one ratchets while the other winds. You wind with the same crown. Note the combination of both black polished screws and fired blued screws. The movement has both. You'll also note that like a Lange movement, it has incredible depth, as you could see through this movement diagonally, not just from top to bottom. Finally, take note, the bridges are just as you'd see in a Lange. What's known as German silver or nickel copper zinc. Take a look at the Datograph Perpetual next to the Duometre. You could see it's the same golden tone because of the copper in this untreated alloy that gives it its golden tone, which becomes more intense and darker with age, though it will never corrode or tarnish. Now, it's free sprung with a 21/6 beat rate, and it's actually 2 movements in one case. There's a power train for the chronograph. There's a separate power train with its own train wheels to impulse the balance and operate the time of day. So what happens when you activate the chronograph is that you double the power demand, but you also double the power supply from the barrels, with the escapement simply switching each one on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off. They actually act in sequence as the anchor effectively locks and unlocks each side. So no loss of amplitude because you double the power when you double the drain on the watch by activating the column wheel chronograph architecture. This was a 200-piece limited series. As you can see, it is limited on the back where it's individually numbered. It is also limited on the dial where it features an individual number plaque. Let's throw this one on the wrist. I should mention this watch features one of the most sumptuous and luxuriously specified straps I've ever encountered on a JLC. I'll admit that their straps from the factory are a bit of a mixed bag, but the Duometre leaves nothing to be desired with incredible quality, substance, and durability. Now, I'll also mention that this was back when every Duometre included a full deployant clasp as a flagship watch. Later on, there'd be some cost cutting as JLC tried to target prices with these Duometre complications, and well, this one is built as a flagship should be, with a full white gold double deployant for security while donning or removing. Now, let's take a look at a more modern Duometre. This was a watch that came out in 200 pieces in 2014, but in a different size, 40.5. A couple of things changed with the 40.5 millimeter Duometre. It became more wearable, but the bezel profile also changed. As you can see, this is more of a domed profile, rounded, a bit more elegant, actually fairly similar to what we just saw on the Day Date Platinum. Now, what sets that apart from the prior bezel is that the prior bezel was sharply conical. As you can see, it has a horizontal outer face and then a conical top, whereas the new bezel is domed and designed principally for elegance. You still get that same quality of case finish, white gold here with the black polished welded on, not screw fixed lugs, and then you get that same quality of crown inside and outside with the blasting and the polish as well as the double knurling. It's the dial where this one sets itself apart. First, it's a different complication, and you can see there's a Foudroyante running full time on this watch, computing the 1/6 of a second. You have center seconds, you have the hours and the minutes, you have the 2 power reserves. Here you have a complication including a moon phase and a date, and the date features an extremely user-friendly pusher adjuster that has the same satisfying crisp snap, report, and tactile feel of a fine column wheel chronograph. Now the watch has 2 power reserves, caliber 381, built the same way as the caliber 380 with one exception. What you see here is a single barrel dedicated exclusively to impulsing the balance, whereas the chronograph featured 1 barrel for time and 1 barrel for chronograph. Here the balance gets its own barrel to maintain utmost amplitude and vigor as well as consistency of timing. The other barrel powers everything you see here, from the 1/6 of seconds to the seconds, hours, minutes, the moon phase, and the date change. So this is a watch dedicated to chronometry, and it has one of the most elaborate stop seconds mechanisms you will ever encounter. As I first pull the crown and stop the Foudroyante, and then I pull the crown the rest of the way, and it 0 resets the seconds, allowing you to set this watch not just to the second, but to the 1/6 of seconds. And you can see how all this works on the back, as it features a little bit of a chronograph architecture, as the first thing that happens is it stops the Foudroyante, and then the hammer at center falls on the heart cam to recenter the seconds, exactly like the recentering of a chronograph. Now there's more. The dial is Grand Faux enamel, and this is done entirely by Jaeger LeCoultre. They do it themselves. The base of the dial is white gold. The Grand Faux enamel is fired up to 20 times at 800 degrees Celsius to create the lustrous, glossy, almost wet appearance that you see here. You can appreciate the fact that on the wrist, though it's not as big as the chronograph, it has just as much presence because of the brightness, the personality, the upbeat disposition, I would even say the somewhat summery sensibility of this dial. This is a watch very much of the French Riviera, as I like to say, of Los Angeles, of Miami, less so of New York, less so of Chicago and Philadelphia. That would be my old Duometre chronograph with its cooler, darker, more sober and serious countenance. This one is all about good times. It is like a yellow Ferrari, and it has that same sensibility, it has that same sense of joie de vivre. It is an awesome watch, but one that complements rather than replaces the chronograph. Now, still with Jaeger LeCoultre, this is a timepiece that's underrated, and frankly, it's one of the most all-around versatile modern JLC watches. Launched for 2014 in tribute to the 1958 E168 and E169 Geophysic. This is the tribute to Geophysic, whereas the original was 35 millimeters and a hardcore technician's watch in the vein of the Rolex Milgauss and the IWC Ingenieur, but far more luxuriously appointed. Back in the day, the Chronometre, as it was called, Geophysic, was the finest watch produced by JLC. Water-resistant, anti-magnetic, an adjusted chronometer, and one of very few US market JLC watches to be both adjusted in multiple positions and equipped with more than 17 jewels. It was positioned as a premium watch, and they were comfortable with paying the tax on importing that kind of watch fully assembled, not in kit form, to the US market. So this was a watch that stood apart in 1958, and in 2014, all of that came back in the watch you see here. The stainless steel 800-piece limited edition, 38.5 millimeter crosshair dial, tribute to Geophysic. Now the tribute runs deep here. No date, crosshair dial, while the majority of the original Geophysics were not crosshair dial. For the rose gold and steel versions, JLC reanimated its most charismatic 1950s geophysic dial, the crosshair, and included the original quarter Arabic numerals, broadsword hands, and if you look carefully, the original geophysic had its radium lume mounted on the inside of the plexiglass. Here, for durability and security, it's mounted on the inner bezel, but you can see the same kind of off-centered peripheral mounting, and you'll note that the lume here is an ecru coloration designed to evoke the patina of the original radium on surviving geophysics. The case lines are sharp. Remember, this came out 5 years before the original Carrera, and you can see that same thrusting, geometric, angular, powerful lug profile that would become a signature of the Carrera. The Carrera is a little bit more integrated, but you can definitely see that the two were of one mind in design, and it's entirely possible that Jack Heuer might have been looking over his shoulder at the recently concluded geophysic run when he designed the Carrera. Now, you'll also note the watch is a combination of polish and satin finish, which plays beautifully for the sake of contrast. It's an easy watch to wear at 38.5 millimeters, and this is a 16 centimeter circumference wrist, so you can see absolutely no problem right here. This is a watch that is sportier than you think. 100 meters water resistant and with a soft iron inner cage like a Milgauss. It's both highly anti-magnetic, highly water resistant, and I should add, a third feature, highly accurate. The JLC Master 1000 Hours Control, which is advertised on the back here, has applied to every JLC watch except the Caliber 101 micro movement since 2004. But the Master 1000 Hours Control does not have the same tolerance for every model. So some of them are allowed quite a bit of variation, but for this watch, the tourbillon standard was applied, so no more deviation than -1 + 4 seconds per day was allowable on the Tribute to Geophysic because the original watch was a chronometer, and this watch takes after that one. You can also see the screw caseback and the geosphere motif that was the symbol of the International Geophysical Year, a scientifical occasion that crossed borders and brought the superpowers as well as other scientists from the East and West together in service of pure science in 1958. And the original Geophysic featured this logo as a tribute to the geophysical year. That's where the name Geophysic came from. And I cannot overemphasize just how desirable this piece is among modern JLC models. Among the tributes, I would say own the Tribute to Polaris, preferably the stainless steel Polaris 65 Paris Boutique Edition, and the steel or platinum Tribute to Geophysic. Now let's talk a little bit, let's talk about a watch that's a bit more accessible, but has just as much personality and perhaps more appeal to tool watch purists. This is the Oris Diver 65 Steel and Bronze with a blue lacquer dial of extraordinary gloss reflectivity. You can see just how dramatically luminescent that dial is. It does incredible things in the light, and I'll even remove the fingerprints because it's not just the gloss blue of the dial, which looks almost like enamel, but that blue lacquer is beautifully distorted off-axis by the dramatic camber of this sapphire, which is designed to evoke the plexiglass that you would see on a true 1965 Oris diver. So you get the scratch resistance of sapphire, but you get that lovely off-axis wobble and refraction that you would have gotten on a vintage watch. Now, I like the fact that this is not plated rose gold like a lot of watches in this price point will do. Oris went with bronze to give the watch color contrast, and you can see that it's beautifully keyed to the simulated patina ecru coloration of the dial, as well as the rose gold plated indices. Now, this is a diving bezel, so it's unidirectional and it's loomed. So you line it up with the minute hand, and you'll note this is a light-duty diver, but still a diver, constant seconds. It has a reference indicator in the bezel, and then it has a 100-meter water resistance with a screw-down crown. So this is a timepiece that is a diver. As long as you're not diving down to the Andrea Doria, this should be just fine for diving's sake. Now, you also note that Oris went with an evocative skeuomorph rivet-style bracelet. It's assembled conventionally, but a skeuomorph by virtue of the rivets, implying a construction like a vintage bracelet. You'll also appreciate the two-tone with the satin finish on the top, the satin finish on the flanks, and the bronze for contrast. It's also a bit more deluxe than I expected. Rather than having a clamshell closure system for the clasp, you can see it uses twin triggers, and there are many internal drilled divots, so you can easily re-anchor the bracelet inside the clasp for fine-tuning the size. Now on the wrist, 40 millimeters and remarkably slender. This is an elegant diver's watch that could equally serve as a dress watch. You can see how low it is, and relative to my cuff, this would be easy to cuff. If I had to slide a sleeve up and over this for black tie, it would be no problem whatsoever. A watch that's handsome and excellent value, and again, a relief from the watches that use plated gold in this price point. Using this rosy bronze is a wonderful diversion that gives the watch an awful lot of appeal and a wonderful consonance of color in silver, blue, and that red tinted bronze. Now, talking about sports watches, there is one sports watch that stands above the rest on this table, and though I have a Vacheron and a Patek, it's neither of those. Other than my own beloved EZM 1.1, this Sinn U1 SE is a 2017 juggernaut for the subsurface. 44 millimeters, though remarkably only 15 millimeters thick, this 1,000 meter diver is constructed in full tegament, not just with U-boat steel or U-boat style. You know that. It has 350 Vickers to 400 Vickers core U-boat steel hardness, but they go one better. This is fully tegamented steel, as Sinn only uses its hard black coating today on top of tegament. Tegament is carbon diffusion, so the U-boat steel, which starts out at about 375 Vickers, goes up to 1,200 Vickers on its surface as a result of the carbon diffusion of the tegament process, and that is for both the bezel and the case. After the tegamentation of the basic U-boat steel, they then apply a hard black coating with up to 2,000 Vickers of hardness. And here's why they only use hard black with tegament. It's because conventional watches that use a black diamond-like carbon are going to use it on a conventional steel that's relatively soft, 316, which is between 250 and 300 Vickers. And here's the thing about 316, it dents easily. So while the DLC is extraordinarily hard, you wind up with an eggshell phenomenon whereby there is a hard coating on the outside but a soft core inboard, so that coating easily cracks, fractures, and chips off, not because the coating gives up, but because the metal underneath gives up under blows. And those blows dent the metal, crack the surfacing, and the chip then ejects itself from the case. So the combination of U-boat steel, tegamentation, and the hard black DLC coating makes this an extraordinarily hardy watch. And you can see, true pre-owned here, not a closeout, not gray market, none of that. This is a watch that has been worn, and it shows absolutely no signs of having been worn. You'll also appreciate a few features of the Sinn U1, which originally launched back in 2005, including the captive bezel construction. You can see how screws are used to fix the bezel to the case, so you can't snap it off by accident the way you can with a Rolex Omega or Tag Heuer bezel. It also has a wonderful detent. Let me slide this one against the mic. That's not the hollow click. That's not the cricket-like chirp you get on a conventional dive watch. That is a deep and throaty detent, distinctive of Sinn. It's absolutely explosive, a circular supernova at night, and you can see by day, just like my EZM 1.1, the contrast here is outstanding. Now, the U1 is the signature Sinn dive watch. If you're going to get just one, you're going to get a U1, and I would say that if you want to get into Sinn, this is an easy way to do it. Though it's 44 millimeters, it's a 44 that wears thin, thanks to a very slender lug-to-lug dimension, as well as a wonderfully supple silicone strap from Sinn. Nice and flexible. You can see how it wraps around the wrist, and with a domed case back, it sits even lower than its 15 millimeter thickness would suggest. That watch can fit under a cuff, and again, 16 centimeter circumference wrist, no issues here. A wrist as small as 14.5 centimeters circumference could wear this watch. Let me turn it right side up so you get a better look at it. I know a lot of you have asked for a better vantage point in that regard. You can see how the crown is off-centered, set at about 430, so this is an ambidextrous watch that can be worn on either wrist without digging your wrist. And of course, Sinn goes over and beyond, over and above, I would say, the call of duty by using a metal bar system, pre-impregnated metal bars to allow you to fix the strap within the clasp once you cut it. So no simple spring bars here, Zinn providing you a wonderfully beefy bar system for retention. You can also see a double deployant trigger actuated clasp with the same treatment, so it too is scratch resistant. And again, true pre-owned watch, how many scratches do you see on the exterior of that clasp? You can see the case back boasting, well, U-boat steel and U1. Let me pop this one open, make it a little bit more pliant so you can see the case back. Solid, and frankly, that's fine. Inside a Sellita SW200. It's tough, but it's not pretty. It's exactly what you would expect in this kind of a watch. U-boat steel, made in Germany, and tegamented. I adore that piece. Now, I teased you with a Patek and a Vacheron sports watch, and sure enough, I'm ready to deliver, as we have a rarely seen version of the 5167 Aquanaut, the 5167 1A. So this is the 5167 1A001. It's the same 40 millimeter, roughly 8.5 millimeter thick Aquanaut, but on a full bracelet. This is not how the Aquanaut was born back in 1997. It was born on a strap. To see it on a bracelet, it appears a little bit more grown up, upscale. I would even say a bit more versatile, as I would be more apt to wear an Aquanaut with a suit on a bracelet, especially this elegantly double finished bracelet, than I would on a rubber strap. Now the timepiece wears easily. It doesn't change the fit. The timepiece is easy to wear too. I'm happy to say that the bracelet clasp used on this watch is an upgrade over the Nautilus, which is beginning to feel and look its age, whereas this system, which uses twin trigger release rather than a clamshell lock, feels and in fact is more contemporary. Now the case back is part of the pleasure here, as you have a display case back and you have a Patek Philippe caliber 324 automatic, silicone hairspring, automatic winding, of course ceramic rotor bearings, very, very handsome. It is a very good looking movement. And actually, let me double check this one. Oh, no, my mistake. This one is not one of the silicone hairsprings. I've got something else on offer. A bit of a consolation prize, as this one was built between 2007, when the 5167 debuted, and June, July 2009, when the Patek Philippe seal arrived. So this one actually features the Poisson de Genève. So while it doesn't have the silicone hairspring, it does feature the free-sprung Gyromax balance. It features the hallmark of Geneva, and very, very few full bracelet 5167 1As were built during that era, as most of these, for price reasons as well as image, remember the 2000s were the era of the rubber strap, most of these were ordered on rubber straps. So to get this watch on the bracelet with the Geneva hallmark is a very big deal, and this is an uncommon example of a 5167. If you're looking at something that's more investable than a current production Patek Philippe seal watch, this is definitely the way to go. That is really nice. I actually have to review this watch because I don't have a video of this particular version of it. Now, for those who prefer to be a little bit counterculture and you don't want to join the hive of Patek Philippe fandom, well, there is the Vacheron Constantin Overseas Generation 2 Chronograph. The current king of the Vacheron heap, in my opinion, is the three-hand date, whereas during the Generation 2, the Chronograph was the one to have. Why? Because it was the breakthrough watch for Vacheron. After the 1996 to 2003 Vacheron Overseas Series 1, which a lot of folks felt was just a little bit too dainty, undersized, and elegant to do battle with the Royal Oak offshores, Vacheron upped the ante. 42.5 millimeters in red gold. The second generation Chronograph used the same Frédéric Piguet vertical clutch column wheel automatic base caliber. It's high horology, it's beautifully finished, it's adjusted in 5 positions like a chronometer, but the key difference here is the vessel. Because of the larger case, Vacheron was able to include something not featured on the first generation watch, a soft iron inner anti-magnetic cage to endow the watch with 25,000 ampere per meter resistance to magnetic field densities or magnetic flux. You could see that there is a caseback image of a sailing ship that is the Italian Navy vessel, a training vessel, Amerigo Vespucci, and you can see it is multiply finished with circular satin finished around the caseback. The reason there is no display is because, first of all, Frédéric Piguet movement, so not in-house, but also because of that soft iron inner cage, which encompasses and shields. 150 meter water resistance. Note the circular satin finish around the edge of this caseback. Then note the radial satin finish on the border immediately surrounding the ship. So you see that radial finish, you see that circular satin finish, and then there is a granular frosted base below raised, relieved, and polished waves and the imagery of the ship. A beautifully executed solid caseback. That's how every solid caseback should be done up. Now the dial is blue lacquer, and one feature that set the second generation chronograph apart from the first was the asymmetrical layout where the chronograph minutes register, and you can see all three registers have rose gold chapter rings, but that was larger to make it easier to read chronograph minutes. Now, ultimately, the asymmetry as well as the double-digit date were lost on the third generation chronograph, which is a wonderful watch in its own right, but it's not as charismatic as this dial, and it doesn't have as many fans. Throw the watch on the wrist, and you can see it's easy to wear. Though a 42.5, it wears nothing like a 42mm offshore, and you can see even on this reasonably substantial, thick, and stiff alligator leather strap, which is fully integrated, by the way, it's still an easy watch to wear on a smaller wrist, and it measures under 13mm thick, so especially after it nestles in, it really sits quite low. And you'll appreciate that slanted Maltese cross-style bezel sits a lot lower on the second generation watch, because if you look at the third generation, you'll note that there is a circular plinth underneath the bezel, which creates a needlessly thicker watch. This one is both more appealing from an aesthetic standpoint on its dial, as well as its case architecture and bezel styling. It's just a more graceful watch than the Generation 3. And put that one on the factory rubber, 150 meters water resistant, so a very tough machine. Now let's talk about the toughest of the tough. Well, the Zin accepted. Let's talk about Panerai. A different take than tegmented steel. This is the Panerai Luminor Submersible 1950 BMG-Tech, PAM 692, launched in 2017, but we didn't really start to see them until 2 years later. This is a very different kind of Luminor 1950 submersible. You can see that the case is the 1950 design, calculated via its curves and creases to evoke the 1950s Panerai combat reference 6152, but it is composed of what is called bulk metal glass or bulk metallic glass, effectively a special alloy of steel that is then remarkably, I would say, flash frozen. That's the best way to describe it. It is flash frozen. It is a complex alloy. Calling it steel is not entirely accurate, but it's the fabrication as much as the alloy itself. By rapidly cooling, it's not able to form an orderly crystalline structure the way you would find in a conventional steel watch, like, for example, the Aquanaut. This has a little bit of a crystalline structure that is both more orderly and, as a result, more vulnerable to dents and scratches. This is not just lighter than conventional steel. This is also more dent resistant. It is a harder alloy. It is also more scuff and scratch resistant. Now the bezel here is world class. The sound and the feel of the Luminor submersible bezel has been since 1998 in the first example of the PAM 25s, the best feeling and sounding bezel on the market. Let's have a listen. It's chunky, it's loud, it's distinct, and it's distinctive. And of course you have the iconic lever-actuated device protecting the crown. What sets this watch apart, even from other 47mm Luminor submersible 1950s, like the 305 and 1305 here, is not the alloy, but the dial, which is an exceptionally rare Panerai applique index gloss lacquer base. That is a blue lacquer. I would call it somewhere between Smurf blue and cobalt blue, but it is dramatic with a few cyan accents. You could see BMG-Tech calling attention to the material, and then inside you have a next generation caliber 9000, the 9010, still a 3-day power reserve, still twin mainspring barrels, still with the nifty time zone function that allows you to step the hour hand independently. You could see that this system also features a thinner profile, as it is 1.9 millimeters thicker than the original caliber 9000, and though you can't see it, it features a full balance bridge to better brace the watch against shock and impact. Rather than the half bridge of the old 9000, this one features a full bridge architecture and it's free sprung. You can see the image of the SLC, the Solura Alanta Corsa, the manned torpedo, or the pig as it's sometimes known, used by 1940s Italian Navy combat swimmers, most notably in the raid on the British fleet in Alexandria Harbor. Throw it on the wrist, it's a 47mm Panerai, but it's also thinner than previous submersible 1950s at about 14.8 millimeters. You're feeling the benefits of the caliber 9010 compared to the old 9000. It is a thinner watch, and you can see it does not sit outrageously thick on the wrist. A wonderfully versatile, iconic design, the Panerai Luminor here in 1950 form, 47 millimeters, and I'll also note, as you can see, featuring traditional Panerai screw-fixed bars, so no spring bars here. This is old school. If you're already set up for Panerai strap swapping, this one lets you do it with your screwdriver kit. An unusual, almost electric blue Panerai factory rubber strap. You can see there are hollows on the underside to vent, and it features the 1970s OP interlocking logo. A lot to love about that watch right there. Now, if you want gloss blue dials of a very different character, but a watch that's still fairly sporty steel, and believe it or not, even 100 meters water resistant, consider from the 2018 model year, the Seiko Prasad SPB 069. Now, the 069, about 40 millimeters in stainless steel. This 40 millimeter steel watch features a true enamel dial. So this enamel dial, as you can see, is glossy blue, and it has the quality of enamel that I'm really showing well from that angle. That's great camera work by Andrew. But you can see the slight rippling and undulations of real hand-laid enamel. It's not perfect. It's not the mirrored finish you see on the Panerai's industrially applied lacquer. And so you're looking at a watch that, despite its sub-$1,500 original retail price, actually includes substantial hand execution on the dial. Now, you'll also appreciate that this watch has an elegant combination of white varnished hands and a lovely yellow varnished lunette counterweight to the needle seconds. Turn it all over and you have Seiko caliber 9R15, automatic winding, 50-hour power reserve, and yes, 100 meters water resistant. This 1,500-piece limited edition even includes a lovely full deployant clasp rather than a pin buckle. Impressive, too, is the use of alligator leather on the factory strap rather than resorting to the cheaper calfskin or even some sort of a textile or rubber. Throw it on the wrist, it's a graceful timepiece and a handsome addition to any attire. It could be a men's watch, it could be a woman's watch, it could be a dress watch, it could be a sports watch, it could be your New York watch, your Philly watch, or your Miami or LA watch. For that matter, it could be your Singapore or Macau watch. Whichever sensibility you are, this watch can match it. A handsome piece and a true manufactured product. There are watches that cost multiples the price of this one that are not manufactured products, and this is not just about Seiko building its movement. It makes the case, it makes the shock protection, it makes the crystal, it even makes the lubricants that are used inside the watch. So that is not just a manufacturer, but a vertically integrated manufacturer. Now, I like to beat up on FP Journe on this show, but truth is I have immense respect for Francois-Paul Journe as a scholar and a watchmaker. He's not necessarily a buddy type that I'd like to hang out with, but the man knows his history. And back in the year 2000, he began to bring to market a realization of a dream. He'd started during his pocket watch era in the early 80s building a resonance pocket watch modeled after the 18th and 19th century resonance clocks of Antide Janvier, the clockmaker. Now, Janvier had coupled pendulum clocks, keep in mind. F.P. Journe believed that the same self-synchronizing action whereby parasitic losses from one escapement and one regulator can help to mutually regulate an adjacent regulator. He believed all that could be applied to a wristwatch. And so in 2000, he launched his first successful implementation of the concept. The pocket watch didn't work, the wristwatch did, and it became the Resonance 1 that you see here. This is an early example from 2001 or 2002, and I know that because, well, depending on when this thing went together, it was either early in the 2002 case production, which probably started in 2001, or it was in 2002. The cases used to be dated right there. So you can see 02R here literally means 2002 resonance. Now you have a brass movement, and I say it's brass, it should be gold if it's brass, right? No, you're seeing the rhodium on top of the brass. Later on, this watch would be reimagined as a gold movement. The brass is more valuable because the brass is more scarce. This is a timepiece that features a 38mm case, which is the rarer and discontinued option between the 40 and the 38 that spanned much of early Journe production. You can see the watch is made of platinum, and here you have a Resonance 1 with the symmetrical dial. not the 2009 forward asymmetrical dial. You have the 38mm case, and you have the brass movement. Those three things mutually inclusive, making for a very, very collectible watch. You also have a different architecture as the movement later changed. The ratchet wheels would disappear, and the bridge for the barrels would be of a completely different design on the gold movements. So you want to have brass. Now, the way this works is that when one balance speeds up, the parasitic loss is emanating out from the other balance and escapement. If one speeds up, the other will slow it. And if one slows down, the other will speed it up. So they stay very precisely synchronized, so they can be adjusted precisely. You can see both balances are free sprung to take and hold a precise adjustment. And then the last adjustment is unique to the resonance. If we can get a little bit closer here, Andrew, you can see at center, there is a rose gold bolt over the center. By adjusting that rose gold bolt, you could see that there is a pinion. There are teeth underneath that rose gold bolt, and there is a rack, just like rack and pinion steering on a car. You could see it on this second balance, which is off to the side under my finger. So that pinion, as it's turned, moves this balance into or away from the other balance. By turning this, you move this laterally, like so, and you find just the perfect distance to maximize the resonance effect. Again, they're coupled together, but the process takes about 7 to 10 minutes to fully take hold. So after 7 to 10 minutes, note you can set both dials independently in dual time fashion, but after 10 minutes, if the 2 seconds hands aren't aligned, you pull the synchronizer down at 4 o'clock on the dial, and you synchronize the seconds. Now you've synchronized everything here, but again, you can set them separately. 38mm in platinum with the yellow gold dial, and it is a yellow gold dial. Inside a platinum case, 38mm. This is a very collectible early FP Journe timepiece. And if you're looking to put together a collection of important early independents, or just focusing on Journe himself, this is a watch that has to be in your collection. All right. I beat up on big brands, and Patek Philippe is kind of the 600, 700, 800-pound gorilla of high horology. While I slag him down from time to time, nevertheless, I have to give credit where credit's due. Launched in 2011, the 5235G Regulator was the most interesting Patek Philippe of the 2010s. With a 40.5mm white gold case, styled to represent angle for angle the old 3448 Perpetual calendar, this is a gorgeous watch. Patek even acknowledged the vintage inspiration of this model by equipping it with a unique buckle that you will not find on other Pateks, including a vintage-style logo on a frosted base. Now, the dial is much like a DeLorean, as it's a vertical satin grain, and you can see the Patek Philippe logo has been ghosted. It's suppressed because it's only engraved. It's not inked onto the dial. And then it's a regulator where you have your hours, your minutes, and your seconds. You have an annual calendar with a day, a month, and a date. Note that you have 2 different silver finishes, 3 different in fact. Azurage, concentric circular guilloche, vertical satin finish on the center dial, and then you have a satin finish that runs around the hour track with all of the hands as well as the printing in blue for a beautiful and subtle contrast. Turn this one over, and you can see a movement that represents the production realization of the advanced research technologies. This watch has all of the mid to late 2000 silicon technologies except for the silicon escape wheel. So you have the hairspring, you have the escape wheel, and you have the anchor. It beats away at a quirky 23,000 and change beat rate, and this is the caliber 31260 REG. It features something that very few other Pateks do in hacking or stop seconds. It's based on the caliber 240, but it's not a 240 derivative. As you can see, the bridged design is dramatically different than the 240. It features individual fingers for the end of the train, and you'll note that it's also much larger than the 240 to fill the full case back. Also, it features a different beat rate, it features the silicon implementation, and it features a longer power reserve than the standard 240. The standard 240 maxes out at 48. This one's about 48 to 55. And of course, a very accurate watch, guaranteed per the Patek Philippe Seal 6-position adjustment and the silicon escapement and hairspring system to run no worse than -3 + 2 seconds per day. An annual calendar regulator with a unique movement only used on the 5235 Regulator series. This is also my favorite Patek Philippe. Girard-Perregaux. We'll go through this one quickly because rectangular watches have a small audience, and rectangular watch complications have an even smaller audience. So this right here is a Girard-Perregaux Foudroyante. It is a Rattrapante and a Foudroyante in white gold, part of a limited run, though not a limited edition, limited production from the mid-2000s. This one comes from about 2005. It has an extravagant dial with split seconds chronograph, Foudroyante, automatic winding, and a Valjoux 7750 base. You can see, though the watch is immense at approximately 53 millimeters lug to lug, it is also a cambered and arced white gold case, so you can really see how this one arcs around the wrist at its edge. Now, jumping to the last grand finale pieces, these are the exit watches for today's show. In my left hand, you could see the Lange und Sohne Datograph Perpetual, sterling silver, gray galvanized dial, 41 millimeter platinum case with a flyback chronograph complication. It features a perpetual calendar as well as a flyback chronograph moon phase and grand date. Now, the watch originally launched in 2006, as you see it right here, and as you'll probably appreciate more pointedly, the movement, caliber L9512, includes 556 parts, and you can really see, as I operate the chronograph, the action of the column wheel as well as the lateral clutch and the recentering hammers that recenter the heart cams as well as the chronograph indications at center. This watch in platinum is an absolute pleasure on the wrist, and it's an easy watch to wear because though it's one of the larger Langes, at 41 millimeters, it's still roundly wearable for most male wrists, and it doesn't sit excessively thick on the wrist at just under 14 millimeters thick with a generously domed bezel. Now, its competition on the table is a watch launched in 2013, the 1815 Rattrapante Perpetual Calendar, which you could see is a split-second perpetual calendar featuring an extravagant solid gold moon phase disc, as do all Lange moon phase watches. And here you can see there's a little bit more symmetry about this dial, as it has 4 complicated quadrants, and you can really cut it in cruciform style, and it remains symmetrical. You can also see how dramatically dished that hour and, or I should say the second and minute track outboard is beyond the hours. Also a sterling silver dial. This is a bigger watch, 42 millimeters in red gold. You could see the caseback caliber 1011 is even larger with 631 parts. You could see as I move it through the light just how much black polished content it has. You could see satin finish on the steel chronograph levers. You could see the split second mechanism, and I'm going to actuate it as you watch, but you could see the pincer system operating the split second mechanism at center. And a Lange und Sohne, unlike most who create split seconds chronographs, use a decoupler system so that the stationary seconds will not cause the chronograph to drag and slow when the second's hand is frozen in place. You can also appreciate that the watch features not 1, but 2 column wheels that operate independently, incredibly deep, again 631 parts. You can appreciate this movement from multiple vantage points, marveling at the black polish, the satin finish, the violet of the pivot jewels, the blue of the fired screws, and the golden tone of the wheels, as well as the German silver bridges. Throw it on the wrist. Note, this is a true complication flagship from Lange. Unlike the platinum perpetual calendar datograph, this features a full deployant clasp. And throw it on the wrist. What presence? Just under 50 millimeters lug to lug. There is very little that can hold a candle to this timepiece in terms of complication, refinement, imagination, or exclusivity, and complicated Lange watches are the high horology buy of our moment, as you're getting a rare watch from a brand that only makes 5,000 pieces a year, and you're getting it from a brand that's owned by Richemont, and thus this will be serviceable forever because Lange is supported by a group. I can't say that of every independent. It is like having your cake and eating it too, as in my mind, and I feel this in my heart, Lange still operates like an independent in the way it designs, finishes, and imagines watches. I think there's a tremendous underserved crown jewel in Lange, and I just hope Richemont doesn't remember that it owns the company. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. Prices in the description, and tmosso at thewatchbox.com is your direct inquiry line for purchase questions about anything you see here. Have a great day, have fun, be safe, time out, Tim out, and thank you for logging on.